This guy didn't just sell oil, he controlled it. He didn't play the game, he rewrote it. While everyone else was chasing barrels, John D. Rockefeller was building the biggest monopoly the world had ever seen. Part 1. The Oil Rush. America, 1860s. A nation rebuilding after Civil War and stumbling into another one for oil. In Pennsylvania, the ground bleeds black. Wells erupt. Fortunes are made and lost overnight. Every man with a shovel thinks he's a millionaire. Every town smells like kerosene and desperation. The oil business was chaos. No rules, no order, just greed. Wild, loud, and lawless. Prices changed every week. Men went broke faster than they could count. It was the Wild West, but with oil instead of guns. And that's where one man walked in. Quietly, calculatingly. Not a cowboy, not a driller. A clerk with perfect handwriting and an even more perfect sense of control. John D. Rockefeller, the man who would turn chaos into empire. Before the world called him a tycoon, Rockefeller was an accountant. He started at 16, obsessed with numbers, with precision, with patterns. While others gambled, he balanced ledgers. He went to church every Sunday, didn't smoke, didn't drink, believed that God rewards discipline. To him, profit wasn't greed, it was divine order. So when he looked at the oil rush, he didn't see excitement. He saw inefficiency, waste. He saw men fighting over barrels instead of building systems, and that made him furious. Because Rockefeller didn't want to get rich fast, he wanted to get rich forever. In 1863, at age 24, he opened a small refinery in Cleveland with a partner named Clark. It was nothing fancy. A few barrels, a few workers, the smell of oil everywhere. But Rockefeller ran it like an army. He measured every cost, every drop. He knew how much profit came from 1 gallon, 1 worker, 1 nail in a barrel lid. He said, "I always tried to turn every disaster into an opportunity." To most people, that was just a quote. To Rockefeller, it was a code. His refinery didn't just survive, it dominated. While others bragged, he expanded quietly. While others celebrated, he saved every penny to buy his competitors one by one, silently. By 1865, when other oil men were drowning in debt, Rockefeller had already begun his takeover, and he did it with the same tool he'd always trusted: numbers. He calculated every shipment, every cost, every freight fee. Then he noticed something. The biggest expense wasn't refining. It was transportation. The railroads controlled the routes controlled the profits, and whoever controlled the railroads controlled the industry. So Rockefeller made a decision. If the railroads were the arteries of America, he'd be the heartbeat. He created Standard Oil Company in 1870. The name itself was a statement. Standard. In a world of chaos, he would be the standard. He said his goal was efficiency. But efficiency can be another word for control. Rockefeller believed competition was wasteful, so he decided to eliminate it, not with violence, but with math. He optimized everything from barrels to byproducts. Even the waste oil was turned into something profitable. He once said, "We shall use every part of the barrel except the hoop." Every refinery that joined him made more money. Every refinery that refused eventually stopped existing. And here's where the story turns from impressive to terrifying. Because Rockefeller didn't just want a successful company, he wanted a monopoly.
But he was too smart to say it out loud. Instead, he said this: "Competition is a sin." And that line, quiet, calm, simple, would become the creed of Standard Oil. Building an empire, brick by brick. By 1870, Cleveland was his base, but Rockefeller wasn't just running refineries anymore. He was running the entire network. He controlled the refineries, the pipelines, the warehouses, even the men who supplied the barrels. If oil moved, Standard Oil got paid. If oil stopped, Rockefeller still got paid. And people started to notice. They called him the oil octopus. Each arm, a company, a contract, a deal. Each tentacle reaching deeper into the heart of American industry. But Rockefeller didn't see himself as a monster. He saw himself as a missionary. He believed the market was chaos, and that only through his control it could find order. He wasn't destroying the industry, he thought. He was saving it. In just 10 years, he turned oil from a boomtown gamble into the most powerful and predictable business in the world. He made lighting cheaper. He made kerosene affordable for every American home. He made himself indispensable. But here's the irony. In bringing order to chaos, Rockefeller became chaos himself. As he built his empire, he also built enemies. Competitors whispered about secret deals with the railroads. Politicians wondered how one man could control an entire commodity, and the press began to ask a dangerous question. Who really runs America? The government or Rockefeller? He never answered. He didn't need to. The numbers spoke for him. By 1879, Standard Oil controlled 90% of all oil refined in the United States. 90%. And the rest? He was coming for them next. He didn't conquer the oil business with luck, or guns, or fame. He conquered it with silence, numbers, and fear. But the real secret to his empire was still hiding in the shadows, waiting to be exposed.
Part 2. The Secret Pact. He didn't use guns, he used contracts. He didn't steal, he negotiated. And with one signature, Rockefeller turned business into war. The South Improvement Company was growing fast. Too fast. Rockefeller controlled most of Cleveland's refineries, but he wasn't satisfied. He didn't want to dominate one city. He wanted the entire country. But there was a problem. Oil wasn't just about refining. It was about moving it. Thousands of barrels every day across miles of track. The railroads were the lifeblood of the oil industry, and they were bleeding Rockefeller dry. Every company paid high shipping rates. It was the only way to move oil from Pennsylvania to the ports. But Rockefeller didn't like equal. He liked advantage. So, quietly, behind closed doors, he made a deal. It was called the South Improvement Company, a beautiful name for an ugly plan. Act 1. The deal with the railroads. Here's how it worked. Rockefeller gathered the biggest railroad executives in America, the Pennsylvania, the Erie, the New York Central, and he made them an offer they couldn't refuse. In exchange for guaranteed shipments of oil, Rockefeller would receive rebates, secret discounts on every barrel he shipped, drawbacks, extra money every time a competitor shipped their oil. And the kicker? The railroads had to share confidential information, how much oil other companies shipped, when, and to where. In short, Rockefeller had just built a corporate spy network. Every rival's move, every shipment, every weakness would flow directly to his desk in Cleveland. It was the perfect plan. Invisible, legal on paper, completely unstoppable.
He didn't have to fight his competitors. He could just outthink them. And while they were still trying to negotiate shipping costs, Rockefeller was quietly shipping their futures straight to his empire. The South Improvement Company was his weapon, and the railroads were his accomplices. It was capitalism turned into conspiracy, and for a few months, nobody outside Cleveland had a clue. Act 2. The leak. Then, someone talked. A letter was leaked, a single sheet of paper outlining the secret deal between Standard Oil and the railroads. When it hit the newspapers, all hell broke loose. The oil producers, the small-town refiners, the wildcat drillers went ballistic. They realized they'd been betrayed. While they were paying full price, Rockefeller was shipping his oil for half. Meetings were held in Titusville and Oil City. Hundreds of angry men, red-faced, shouting, banging fists on tables. One local paper called it a crime against the people. The oilmen formed committees. They boycotted the railroads. They blocked tracks. They threatened to burn Rockefeller's tank cars. It was chaos. For a moment, it looked like Rockefeller had finally lost control. But here's the thing about John D. Rockefeller. He never played a short game. Even as protests filled the streets, even as the government threatened investigation, Rockefeller stayed calm. He let the anger burn itself out, and while everyone was screaming, he was buying.
Act 3. The silent takeover. See, the outrage destroyed the South Improvement Company, yes, but it also destroyed Rockefeller's competition. While the independents were busy fighting the railroads, Standard Oil was quietly buying their refineries. Rockefeller appeared at their doors, calm, polite, deadly. He'd sit down, open his ledger, and say something like, "Gentlemen, you have two options. You can join me or compete with me. But if you compete, I will ruin you." It wasn't a threat. It was a statement of fact. And within 6 weeks, Rockefeller bought nearly every refinery in Cleveland. 22 of 26. Gone. Absorbed. That moment became known as the Cleveland Massacre. No blood, no gunfire, just ink and fear. By 1872, Standard Oil had transformed from a company into a machine. It owned the refineries, the shipping, the storage tanks, the pipelines. It even owned the men who made the barrels. If oil moved, Rockefeller got paid. If oil didn't move, he still got paid. And the genius of it all? He did it legally. There was no law against what he'd done because no one had ever imagined anyone could do it. He once said, "The ability to deal with people is as purchasable as sugar or coffee, and I will pay more for that ability than for any other under the sun." Rockefeller's real skill wasn't oil. It was psychology. He understood fear. He understood greed. He understood that if you gave a man the illusion of choice, you could control him forever. Act 4. A new kind of power. By the time the dust settled, Standard Oil controlled almost everything. Competitors had either sold out or gone bankrupt. Railroads bent to his will. Even the banks started calling him Mr. Standard. And yet, the public barely knew his name. Because Rockefeller wasn't a showman. He was a shadow. While other tycoons built mansions, he built networks. While they flaunted wealth, he built systems. He once said, "A friendship founded on business is better than a business founded on friendship." Cold, precise, unapologetic. Rockefeller's empire now stretched across the nation, and every drop of oil that burned in an American lamp carried a piece of his signature. But behind the brilliance was something darker, because while Rockefeller believed he was creating order, the rest of the world saw something else: a monopoly, a monster, a man who had turned capitalism into domination. And soon, one woman with a pen would come for him. Closing line. Transition to Part 3, the Cleveland Massacre. The South Improvement Company was gone, but its spirit lived on, in every deal, every contract, every handshake. Rockefeller had learned his greatest lesson. Control isn't taken by force. It's signed in silence.
Hot Free, the Cleveland Massacre. No bullets, no blood, just silence, contracts, and fear. In just 6 weeks, John D. Rockefeller would conquer an entire city. They called it the Cleveland Massacre. Act 1. After the Fire. 1872. The South Improvement Company had collapsed. Public outrage killed it, newspapers mocked it, politicians swore revenge. Rockefeller smiled. Because while everyone celebrated the victory over Standard Oil, he was already planning his next move. The plan was simple. If he couldn't officially control the oil industry through the railroads, he'd do it unofficially, through ownership, through silence. At that point, Cleveland was America's oil capital. More than 30 refineries, all fighting for survival. Prices fluctuated daily. Refiners undercut each other until no one could breathe. Rockefeller looked at that chaos and saw opportunity. He told his partners, "We must organize this industry. We must end waste and competition." But what he really meant was, we must own it all. Act 2. The Silent Visits. And so he began, quietly, systematically, office by office, door by door. Rockefeller arrived unannounced at the offices of his competitors, always polite, always calm. He'd sit down across from the refinery owner, open his black notebook, and start talking numbers. He'd say something like, "Gentlemen, I know your business. I know your shipments, your debts, your costs. We can either work together, or you can fight me. But I must warn you, I don't lose." It wasn't anger. It wasn't arrogance. It was mathematics. He knew exactly how much each rival was worth and how long before they went bankrupt. He offered them 3 choices. 1. Sell to Standard Oil for fair value and join the trust. 2. Stay independent, but face price wars they couldn't survive. 3. Or go bankrupt. Most didn't need convincing. They saw the ledger. They saw the numbers. They sold, one by one. 22 refineries in just 6 weeks. Act 3. Fear as a business strategy. The press called it the Cleveland Massacre. But there was no blood, no violence, just paperwork. Rockefeller turned fear into efficiency. He didn't threaten men, he educated them. He told them that joining Standard Oil wasn't surrender, it was evolution. Together, he said, we can stabilize the market, reduce waste, and serve the public. It sounded noble. It sounded holy. But behind that calm voice was domination. Because once a competitor sold, their refinery didn't just become part of Standard Oil, it became part of a machine. Every piece of equipment was relocated to more efficient plants. Every worker retrained or dismissed. Every operation optimized. And soon Cleveland's skyline changed. Where once stood dozens of chimneys belching black smoke, now only a few remained, all
belonging to Standard Oil. The city had been conquered, not with soldiers, but with spreadsheets.
Act 4. A machine without mercy. From Cleveland, Standard Oil expanded like wildfire. Chicago, Pittsburgh, New York, Philadelphia. Everywhere, the same pattern repeated. Buy, absorb, dominate. By 1875, Rockefeller controlled nearly every major refinery in the region. And with scale came power, the kind no government could yet understand. He demanded exclusive contracts with railroads. In return, he guaranteed steady shipments. That meant lower costs for Standard Oil and bankruptcy for everyone else. He even built his own pipelines, cutting the railroads out entirely. When they protested, he just smiled. He'd already won. Rockefeller called it efficiency. His enemies called it economic strangulation, and they weren't wrong. But here's the twisted brilliance. Every improvement he made lowered prices for the public. Kerosene became cheaper, cleaner, safer. The average American could light their home for pennies. So while small refiners cursed his name, ordinary people worshipped his product. He wasn't just rich, he was essential. Act 5. The psychology of control. Rockefeller wasn't driven by greed, not really. He was driven by order. He hated waste, in business, in people, in emotion. Even his handwriting was perfectly straight. He believed chaos was sin, and he was the man sent to cleanse it. He said, "The way to make money is to buy when blood is running in the streets." Except in his world, the blood was oil. His power wasn't loud. It was silent, bureaucratic, invisible. He didn't shout, he signed. He didn't fight, he negotiated. By the late 1870s, Standard Oil controlled 90% of U.S. refining capacity. 90%. The man who once sold produce as a teenager now dictated the price of energy for an entire nation. And yet, the public still barely knew his face. Because Rockefeller understood something no one else did. Power works best when no one can see it. Act 6. The aftermath. Competitors were gone, partners were rich, and Rockefeller was untouchable. But in the quiet aftermath of his success, a storm was forming. The journalists began to ask questions. The government began to watch. And in a small Pennsylvania town, a young woman named Ida Tarbell began to write. Her father had once owned an independent refinery, one of the victims of the Cleveland massacre, and she would spend the next decade doing what no man dared to do, unmasking Rockefeller. But that's another story.
Part 4. The enemy of the empire. Every empire, eventually, creates its own destroyer. Rockefeller built his with steel, oil, and silence. But his greatest enemy carried nothing but a pen. Act 1. The God of Oil. By 1890, Rockefeller was untouchable. Standard Oil wasn't just a company, it was the bloodstream of America. Kerosene lit every home. Railroads ran on his contracts. Politicians whispered his name like a prayer or a warning. Even the banks waited for his approval before lending to others. He didn't own the oil business. He was the oil business. And he ruled from the shadows. No press conferences, no interviews, no photos. Just quiet control. He said, "I would rather earn 1% off 100 men's efforts than 100% of my own." It wasn't greed, it was philosophy. Rockefeller didn't see people as rivals. He saw them as resources. He'd mastered numbers, then mastered fear. Now he had mastered invisibility. But power always leaves a shadow, and in that shadow, someone was watching. Act 2, The Woman with a Pen. Ida Minerva Tarbell, born in 1857 in the oil fields of Pennsylvania, right where Rockefeller's empire began. Her father was an independent oil producer, a hard-working man who built his refinery from nothing. Until one day, Standard Oil arrived, and within months, he was out of business. Ida never forgot that. The quiet anger, the way her father refused to speak Rockefeller's name. She grew up with one question burning in her mind. How could one man destroy so many and still call it progress? Years later, she became a journalist, one of the few women in a field dominated by men. But Ida didn't write gossip. She wrote truth. And her truth had teeth. When McClure's magazine hired her in 1900, she pitched a story, a full investigation of the most powerful corporation in America. Her editor laughed. "Standard Oil?" he said. "That's suicide." She smiled. "Then I'll write it slowly." Act 3, Hunting the Invisible Giant. Ida didn't have spies or money. She had something better, persistence. She spent 5 years digging through court records, shipping manifests, business letters, and contracts. She interviewed former Standard Oil managers quietly in back rooms and train cars. She collected over 400 pages of evidence. And slowly, the pattern appeared. Rebates, secret deals, threats. A web of control so complex it made corruption look like science. Ida Tarbell turned Standard Oil inside out, piece by piece. And when she finally published her findings in 1902, the world exploded. McClure's magazine released the first chapter of the history of the Standard Oil Company. Readers couldn't believe it. She wrote not as an economist, but as a storyteller. Each paragraph cut deeper than any law. She called Rockefeller's empire a thing of monstrous efficiency, built on secrecy and fear. She didn't scream, she didn't accuse. She simply showed the truth and let it burn. Act 4, The Public Awakening. America had never seen anything like it. A single woman exposing the richest man alive. The newspaper spread her words. Churches preached sermons about greed. Politicians who once bowed to Rockefeller started to tremble. The name Standard Oil became a curse. People saw the company not as progress, but as predation. The public wanted justice. And soon, Washington listened. In 1906, the U.S. government filed a lawsuit under the Sherman Antitrust Act. It accused Standard Oil of creating a monopoly in restraint of trade. Rockefeller didn't flinch. He had survived worse. He said quietly, "The day of combination is here to stay. Individualism has gone, never to return." He believed the government couldn't touch him. He was wrong. Act 5, The Trial of the Century. The courtroom was chaos, stacks of documents, witnesses, journalists scribbling furiously. For years, Rockefeller's lawyers defended his empire. They argued that Standard Oil made everything cheaper, that it had improved safety, efficiency, progress, that monopoly was simply the price of excellence. But Ida Tarbell's investigation had changed the narrative. She turned economics into morality. This wasn't about price, it was about power. In 1911, the Supreme Court delivered its verdict. Standard Oil was guilty, an illegal monopoly, and it must be broken apart. The courtroom erupted. Reporters called it the death of a giant. But Rockefeller smiled, because the stocks of those new companies skyrocketed. His personal fortune doubled overnight. He had lost his empire, but gained immortality. The cost of immortality. The public cheered his downfall. Ida Tarbell became a hero, and Rockefeller became the face of corporate greed. But behind the myth was a paradox. He never answered her publicly, never wrote back, never said her name. But in private, he read every word she wrote. And later, when asked what he thought of Ida Tarbell, he said only this: "She has done a great service to the public." It was the closest thing to respect he ever gave an enemy. By then, he was retired, living in quiet luxury, feeding birds, counting blessings, and giving away his fortune. Rockefeller became the world's first great philanthropist, founding universities, funding medical research, eradicating diseases. But some said it wasn't generosity, it was guilt, because for every life he saved, there were hundreds of families his empire had crushed. Closing line. Transition to final part. The legacy of power. Ida Tarbell destroyed the myth of the untouchable tycoon. She proved that power, no matter how vast, can still bleed ink. But even when broken, Rockefeller's shadow remained. Because men like him don't die. They multiply.
Part 5. The Legacy of Power. Empires rise, empires fall, but true power doesn't die. It transforms into something else. 1911. Standard Oil was gone. 34 new companies stood in its place, broken pieces of a shattered empire. But the man who built it all was still smiling, because John D. Rockefeller had learned something everyone else forgot. Power doesn't come from what you own. It comes from what you influence. Each of those 34 companies carried his DNA, his management, his strategies, his money. And when their stock prices exploded, so did his fortune. In 1 year, Rockefeller's personal wealth doubled. He had lost the battle and won the war. But he was no longer the titan who crushed competitors. He had become something else, a ghost that haunted every balance sheet, every oil barrel, every boardroom. Even in defeat, Rockefeller remained the invisible hand of capitalism. Act 2. The Transformation. In the years that followed, Rockefeller did what no one expected. He disappeared. No interviews, no scandals, just silence and philanthropy. He founded universities, Chicago, Spelman, Rockefeller University. He funded medical research that cured yellow fever and hookworm. He gave away over $500 million, nearly all of it anonymously. To the public, he had redeemed himself. To history, he was rewriting the ending. But was it redemption or rebranding? Some said it was guilt, a man trying to wash his empire's sins. Others said it was genius, a man turning generosity into immortality. Because make no mistake, even his charity was efficient. Every donation had a purpose, every gift a return. He once said, "Charity is injurious unless it helps the recipient to become independent of it." Even in kindness, he sought control. But power always leaves a cost. Rockefeller's health declined, his hair fell out, his nerves collapsed. By 60, he looked 80. Doctors said it was stress. Some said it was punishment. He'd spent a lifetime controlling everything, markets, men, even God, and now his own body refused to obey. He withdrew to his estate in Pocantico Hills, 3,400 acres of peace that money couldn't buy. There he walked the gardens, fed the birds, watched the sunrise. Neighbors said he looked peaceful, but behind that smile was a man haunted by silence. He had built the modern world and lost himself in it. One reporter asked him late in life, "Mr. Rockefeller, do you believe in destiny?" He smiled. "I believe in discipline."